Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a tank that you don't see very often. It's the one that I'm typically standing in front of when I'm doing my videos, and a lot of people have asked me to do a video about that tank itself. Now basically what this tank is all about is really a bunch of misfit fish that I don't regularly show on my channel, simply because they are not of the quality that some people might find that they would want in their own tank. Now, I don't find this to be something that I look at as fish that aren't worthy of filming, but I find it more importantly that these fish are able to enjoy life as well as any other fish, and they're good examples of showing that fish who are not top-notch fish in the discus industry, number one, you would never breed them because you don't want to put a weak link in the species chain, but you also don't want these fish to not have a good life just because their color wasn't perfect, their shape wasn't perfect, and for various other reasons. Now, this is the reasons why I keep this tank, and it's one of my favorite tanks because it is a well laid out tank that I've really enjoyed over the last few years. There were a time when I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this tank. I thought about wilds at some point, and then I decided when I got a few fish that were not 100% perfect fish, typically rescues or something of that nature, or I purchased something that didn't quite look the way I thought it would look, then they ended up in this tank. Now, there are a lot of beautiful things about this tank that have nothing to do with just the discus, but there are some other species in here that do very well and are perfect fish for the tank. And as you can see, as I zoom in here, we have some German blues, and we also have some Bolivian rams. We have a pair of those. I think we have 3 German blues. We have some Siamese algae eaters, which are getting kind of large and will not probably continue to do as good a job as they get older, because they have a tendency to rely more on you feeding them than doing their job of eating algae out of your tank. And so we will likely be pushing these to a larger tank and getting some smaller fish so that those smaller fish can take care of algae of any kind that might be building up on leaves or anything else in the tank. Now also we have a fair amount of black neon tetras in the tank, as well as some, I believe, ember tetras. We have about 20 of those in here, and what I call kitty tetras, which I wasn't sure that we're going to do well in this tank because they're a little more temperature sensitive. This tank is set at right about 85.2 degrees, and that's getting up there for some of these tetra species. But the black neons are proven, tried and true for that temperature, so that's not an issue. And I've also had neons, or not neons, but ember tetras do equally as well in these temperatures in several of my tanks. So those I didn't worry about. Now the kitties have adapted perfect. We haven't lost a single one. They've been in the system here for about 3 months now, and they seem to have adapted very well. The 2 latest members of the tank are these what are supposed to be Marlboros. If you look at the coloration on them, you can see why they are not the perfect fish for a collector or somebody who is wanting a absolutely perfect Marlboro in the sense of their coloration. Now, there's nothing wrong with these fish health-wise and so forth, but they are a fish that is really not going to be something that you would put in a show tank. So whenever anyone asks me about this tank, what I like to refer to it as is my my love tank, because this is a tank where the fish that are in here get a lot of attention and love, because they are rejected by others possibly, or they have been fish that have come in that I just would not be putting in my show tanks. But this is a wonderful community tank that I really, really enjoy. One of my favorite fish in here, these are not rejects of course, but they're just fish that are necessary, are the corydoras, which we're going to go ahead and zoom in on here. These are really essential fish for any tank. I've talked about this in many of my videos in the past, and they are very important to the health and welfare of your tank, meaning that they are part of the cleanup crew that keeps your tank in really tip-top shape. Now this is a tank that gets a water change about every other day, about 30%, so it's a very healthy tank to begin with. But it is always really essential to have corydoras or cory catfish in your tank to keep the fish tank clean, and to make sure that there are no leftover food that your discus or other fish did not eat, and that is left to the responsibility of these corydoras to make sure that the tank is absolutely clean. If you do put corydoras in your tank, my recommendation is that you keep them in larger groups, simply because they do better that way. I have a whole video on that, and I will connect that to the description area of this video. And if you want to learn more about corydoras, that's a great place to do that. Now you're seeing 3 here. There are actually 3 varieties of corydoras in this tank. One would be the Julie cory, which is probably the most popular cory out there. Surveys are very popular as well, but a little bit more pricey. And then the salt and peppers, which I like because they just are a little bit more enthusiastic about really taking care of cleaning the tank. And if I were to go through here and show you, there are probably about 15 corydoras in here of the 3 species, and they all do very well together. Now, you want to make sure, if you're keeping cories, that you do have a sandy bottom tank, because they thrive more in a sandy bottom because it does not wear down the barbels on the front of their face where they are sifting through the sand, and that is very important to the health and welfare of that fish. So getting back to the other parts of this tank, we do have some Bolivians, as I said, in here, and that would be these guys right here. There's a pair, male and female, and we also have some, like I said, German ram cichlids in here, blue German ram cichlids that are, I would suggest, probably in their teenage years. They're not quite ready for breeding and that sort of thing, but they will breed. I've had German blues in this tank before, and have moved them on to other tanks, but they have grown very quickly and do very well, and will pair up and start to lay eggs. But this is a very difficult tank to do that in. You want to try to put them in their own tank if you're breeding them, where they have the ability to just take care of their young and make sure that the breeding process is something that you're successful at. In a tank like this, typically your fish are not going to be able to protect their young as easily, and the young will be eaten by the rest of the fish in the tank. So I'm not worried about that at this stage here, because I haven't seen any pairing up of these German blues at this point here. When I do, I will likely move them on to their own separate tank, possibly a 20-gallon or something like that, where they will do very well by themselves. Now, one other aspect of this tank is that this is a island style tank, and what I mean by that is there's 2 main areas to the tank that, as you can see as I go to a larger screen. There's a main island, some smaller island areas, and the larger island. Now the islands themselves are made up of Anubias and Java fern. There are various types of Anubias in here: Anubias nana, Anubias nana petite. I would say probably 3 or 4 Java ferns in here as well. And that's really the makeup of it, because I did not want to have to plant plants directly into the soil. So I've made use of the tank's own rock areas where I'm able to wedge the plants in between the rock and the wood, or the rocks themselves. And after a couple of months, they will start to take root in those areas and grab onto the rocks. Now, what I'm using for rock in here is what they call maple stone. And the reason why I like maple stone is it's very porous rock, so it's a good rock for using to collect what I would call beneficial bacteria colonies, which help the tank itself. And that is why this particular rock is so important to this tank to me. Now, this was experimental for me. I'd never used maple stone before. I think I'd used it in one other tank in another video, maybe a year or 2 ago, but I wanted to specifically use it in this tank because I thought it was important for the health and welfare of these fish. And I also wanted to see if my experiment of using this with the filtration system that I'm using in here. Now, this is an all-in-one tank. That's something I failed to mention at the beginning here, but it is an all-in-one tank, and it does have its own built-in system. But I also have a supplemental canister filter on here, which is an Awase 350, which, as you can see, has a feed in the back of the tank here, and that really helps to make this water about as crystal clear as it can possibly be. Now, one of the things that you're going to find as you watch this video, one of the problems that we do have is that the sand, sometimes the fish will play around in it and whoop it up, and you will see sand particles just sort of floating around in here. They do tend to settle, but when I'm near the tank this close, the fish tend to act up a little bit more, and you'll see a little bit more of that activity where they will run across the sand in a way that, like I said, whips up the sand and puts those particles into the water. I don't want you to think that that makes the water dirty. It doesn't in any way. It's just a problem that you have when you're filming, and not an issue as far as the cleanliness of the water. Now, I like to use sand in most of my tanks because I do a lot of discus tanks, and discus do really well and thrive very well in a sandy bottom tank. And that's important to me, to make sure that when I choose a sand, I choose a color that is going to work good with the rock that I'm using as well. And as you can see, these two, the rock Aquascape itself, or hardscape I should say, looks very nice together with the substrate, which is just a beige Caribbean sand. And I really think that it's some of the best sand out there. It's very fine, it's very easy to use, and very easy to clean as well. One of the problems you might have if you're using a python or some kind of a system like that is sucking the sand up in there. So my recommendation is, if you're using that type of system, that you glide about an inch or so above the top of the sand and move your python filter from the bottom very lightly across the top, whooping up just enough to get the waste that might be in the tank. Now, I do waste management in the tank by vacuuming it at least every 2 or 3 times that I do a water change, so at least once a week, because like I said, I do a water change every other day of about 30%. Now, these fish in here, as I said, they're a little bit of a misfit as far as colors. They're not always perfect fish, but I find that sometimes the fish that are not perfect are the most enjoyable because they have some of the most lovely personalities of a lot of the discus fish that I do have. You've seen my other tanks, you know that I have some beautiful fish in those tanks, and I think these guys are equally as beautiful in their own way, and I hope that you will find them equally as beautiful as well. Thank you for joining me today. People have asked me about this tank, and I wanted to kind of go through it and give you an idea of what I'm keeping in here and why when I'm doing my videos you never really get a chance to see this tank, other than the fact that you may see a little bit of the hardscape and some of the fish that might come into view as I'm standing in the center doing my filming. Now, one of the things that I would tell you is that if you have any questions about keeping a tank like this, please leave that in the comments down below, and I will get back to you within 24 to 48 hours typically. Unless it's a question that I don't have an answer for, then I will refer you to somebody who will be able to provide you with that information. Thank you for joining me today. Give me a like on this. Also, like I said, leave some comments down below and subscribe to the channel. The channel is growing and we're doing really well. Now, as I've told people before, I don't do this for a living. This is a hobby for me. I have a different type of living that I make, and most of you who know me really well know what I do for a living, and it has nothing to do with collecting fish. This is a hobby that I just take very, very seriously and I love very much. So I want to make sure that you understand that and know that this channel is not here to make money. So when you subscribe to it, the monetization on it, typically what I do with that is use those funds to, of course, maintain my hobby, but also anything extra goes to charities of my choice that have to do with animals, animal abuse, and those sort of things. So I like to give back in that way, and I know that you can appreciate that. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. We're going to focus on this tank a little bit more in the future, but I just wanted to kind of give you a rundown. I appreciate you joining me. As I said, thanks for joining me today, and we will see you on the next one. Until then, we're out of here.